We're looking at the next stage of camera improvements for Huawei, partnered with Leica in producing dual sensor cameras for phones. The P10 Plus follows on the heels of the Mate 9 with similar sensors, software, and specs. These are some of our favorite shooters, especially for creating photographic still images. So, should the P in P10 stand for progress? Buckle up, folks, we have a lot of ground to cover, and I'm gonna move pretty quick. The P10 Plus represents evolution, bringing Mate features to the more fashionable line of Huawei phones. Specifically for the camera, the Plus shares the same sensors, same megapixels, and mostly the same feature set. The single hardware improvement over the Mate and smaller P10 camera are wider apertures, now opened to f1.8, up from f2.2, which we've seen since the P9. Starting off with exposure and saturation, Huawei is subtly but noticeably pushing into more eye-pleasing territory. Over the Mate 9, similar setups deliver a bit more saturation. This is gorgeous for greens, blues, and earth tones, but can sometimes be an issue with warmer colors. Most phones have issues with reds, for example, and the Plus is no exception, pushing brightness and color to a point where these flowers start to sizzle. The built-in tools to reduce saturation are somewhat severe. Instead, dialing back the exposure a half stop does more to preserve detail and arrive at a more accurate color. With wider apertures, metering becomes a bit more important. Letting the phone decide produces more clipped highlights than we would prefer, but tapping on the center of this flower to engage the spot metering balances the brightness out better. In delivering more eye candy, the Plus airs warmer with white balance than previous Huawei's. In warm California light, we can expect a bit more of a glow in afternoon shots, and shaded shots avoid the trap of arriving too blue. Like the increase in saturation, it's not always the most accurate, but it's not overly aggressive or destructive. Happily, these cameras still deliver terrific dynamic range. Purposely overexposing a shot by 2 stops and taking the raw file, we can easily walk that back to recover not only all the texture in the walls, but also most of the detail in the clouds. Shooting raw is an excellent safety net, and the P10 Plus delivers top-tier performance here. Looking at JPEGs, this dual sensor approach has a lot of merit. Instead of 2 separate cameras, every single photo, these sensors work in tandem to capture more light and paint in more detail. Leica's design here produces still images unlike any other phone we've reviewed. And even in high contrast situations, detail and clarity are wonderfully captured. It's a shame most people share photos through heavily compressed services like Instagram, as the full resolution shots can be stunning. Taking a quick tour around the app, layout is very similar to the Mate 9. The main composition window is well featured and gestures slide to the left for various modes like panorama, slow motion, and HDR. Sliding to the right lands you in menus and settings. This is a phenomenal attempt at turning a phone into a rangefinder camera, and users have tremendous control over photo output. Video settings are a bit lacking compared to the current champ LG V20, and the P10 Plus loses the directional microphones found on the Mate 9, but the biggest issue facing consumers is navigating this app. There's a lot of stuff to control, so there's a bit of muscle memory to train in remembering where all of these settings live. And we still run into a few control frustrations, like disabling the zoom when shooting RAW. Maybe instead, this pop-up should alert the user that RAW is disabled when zooming, but still allow the user to perform the action they wanted to. Just a thought, but I digress. And speaking of that zoom, the Plus employs the same oversampling trick to create a full resolution photo from a crop on the image sensor. It works well enough, getting you closer to your subject, but users should still expect some image degradation. Huawei's dual sensor solution isn't like Apple or LG's with different focal length lenses, so we don't see any advantages when changing the field of view. Close focusing distance is on par with other flagships. We get a really pretty bokeh when working at macro distances. When looking at the difference in aperture size, the Plus produces slightly softer backgrounds, but the differences between the Plus and the Mate 9 or the smaller P10 will be difficult to distinguish even when really digging into some pixel peeping. Especially when considering the very good software blur mode, bokeh on the Plus isn't a significant advantage when discussing image sensors this small. For folks who want more info, we produced a separate video last year where we compared the P9 with f2.2 apertures against the Galaxy S7 with an f1.7 aperture for a more in-depth look at smartphone aperture and bokeh blur, which is linked down below this video. Now, a happy improvement over the Mate 9, autofocus performance is noticeably improved. There's still a pulse as the lens shifts, but the focus lock arrives faster even when shooting video. It's not a pretty slide into focus, so you shouldn't expect a rack focus effect, but it's snappy and it's accurate. Huawei also takes another step towards improving HDR content. Most Androids treat HDR like a shadow brightening mode, and all too often this kills highlights. But we see some improvements here over previous phones in not overly boosting bright sections of your frame. For a phone which already excels at producing contrasty images, these HDR improvements can help balance out some high contrast situations. But panorama performance is still just upper mid-pack. Carefully scanning the street scene, we see a number of stitching errors in the power lines. Depending on how busy your shot is, exercising more care and rotating your phone can help, but we're all just going to own 360-degree cameras anyway, right? No? Just me? Okay. Now, I hate taking selfies, but the shooter on the P10 is better than average, a lot better than average. Now also branded as a Leica camera, output is solid, and the beauty mode filtering has been enhanced to include bokeh filtering and better Odo mode skin blurring. Video from this front shooter is also more than adequate for sending a fun message or doing some light vlogging. All in all, a very nice effort from Huawei for my least favorite phone photography feature. Now moving to low light, the increased aperture size did not drastically change background blur, and my prediction was we'd only see modest improvements to low light performance, and that's where I was wrong. The wider iris for the lens lets in enough light for us to see lower ISO settings and faster shutter speeds for similar exposures. The Plus is easily capable of producing brighter images with less noise per exposure than the smaller P10. Night shots are colorful, lively, and really showcase Leica's street and candid photography heritage. As a point of discussion, many people have criticized the output from Huawei phones as being too grainy, which is actually a feature and not a bug. Leica engineers have consistently pointed to a little grain as one of their methods for making phone output feel more like film. It's not always the prettiest when pixel peeping, but you shouldn't be doing that anyway. Shame on you. Look at the whole composition. This is purely a subjective assessment, but personally, I feel this texture helps create an organic sense of action or movement, that this moment was alive, frozen in an instant in this image. The practical side of this discussion, that allowing a little extra grain to remain means we aren't hitting photos too hard with noise reduction tools that can blur out detail or create watercolor-like splotchy photos. The Plus also features a dedicated monochrome mode using that secondary sensor. You can see the perspective switch from the RGB to the black and white camera. Monochrome is a captivating way to see the world and capture images, so including a dedicated sensor just to capture these shots fits right in with Leica's imaging history. If phones are going to replace standalone cameras for most consumers, Huawei's going to make sure you're well prepared for nearly any photography situation. Shifting over to moving images, the Mate 9 ushered in Ultra HD video for Huawei. The P10 continues that, though it's difficult to see any significant improvements over last year's phone. This camera produces a very high quality video, though when handheld, it's a busy image where we can easily see hand movements. On the whole, video exposure and saturation will closely resemble still photo performance, but only the RGB sensor is used, so video won't have the same textural quality as still photos. It should be reiterated that this system shoots UHD video using H.265 compression. This means we arrive at file sizes nearly 30% smaller than the UHD video produced by an iPhone 7. But Google does not currently support this video codec because of licensing issues. H.265 is a boon for file sizes and bandwidth, but it's frustrating that Google Photos won't alert you that your videos are not being backed up. Again, Google's oversight here. So H.265 is a bit trickier to work with, but every format shift comes with some kind of teething pain. We have a separate video also linked below this review for folks interested in how they can edit or upload these videos, and now we can move on. In video, we can also take a better look at stabilization. It's terrific for still photos, but video looks busier than many competing devices. Kicking down to HD video, we can also employ software stabilization, but the combination of lens warping hardware and software scanning produces an unsettling pulse to video output, which is more destructive in my opinion than just dealing with the slightly shakier hardware-only stabilization. Plus, once you get used to UHD video, this 1080p output just feels dull and lifeless. The P10 does not inherit the directional microphone array from the Mate 9, but these mics are still terrific performers, handling wind and traffic noise above our freeway test well enough. Falling behind HTC and LG, Huawei has a performer easily capable of running with Samsungs and iPhones. Lastly, looking at slow motion, Huawei captures a respectable 120 frame per second video, but converting it to slow motion in the phone, we lose a ton of data, reducing overall quality substantially. It's a shame we go from a 40 megabit per second video to 5 megabit per second video. If you can edit the raw video directly, say from a computer, you'll end up with a nicer image. So let's wrap this up. Where does that leave us with the cameras on the Huawei P10 Plus? In our review of the phone, we offered the prediction that there wouldn't be a significant difference in overall performance between the P10 and the P10 Plus. On the whole, we were correct. These sensors are too small to see a tremendous difference in bokeh, but we were pleasantly surprised to see a more significant change to low light performance. The Mate 9 wasn't a low light slouch, but the P10 Plus is now a top-tier night performer. Huawei remains one of our top recommendations for still photographers. This is exceptional performance with incredible controls. Moving beyond just trying to impress consumers with auto-processing, flashy saturation, or increasingly juicy HDR settings, this is now a worthy platform for composition and near-professional results. If we can't get phones with larger image sensors, Huawei's dual-sensor approach is the next best thing. Where there's room for improvement is on video performance, where this phone becomes an upper mid-pack performer. Great video quality at smaller file sizes, but we'd appreciate more manual controls, a return to the directional microphone array, and smoother stabilization. Folks, this is an easy recommendation, and it's an early frontrunner to make our end-of-year best camera list. Likely its toughest competition will come from whatever Huawei releases in the next Mate. As always, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for our full P10 coverage, including reviews and comparisons of both phones, and help us out with some sharing on your favorite social networks. For Pocketnow, I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, author of Take Better Photos, Smartphone Photography for Noobs, aka Some Gadget Guy on Twitter and Instagram, and I will catch you all on the next review.